Welcome to the Farm to School podcast, where you will hear stories of how youth thrive and farmers prosper when we learn how to grow, cook, and eat delicious, nutritious local foods in schools across the country
and the world.
We're your hosts. I'm Rick Sherman.
Hey, and I'm Michelle Markestein, and we are here with Jade Davidson. Hi, Jade.
Hi.
I met Jade most recently over the last year as she, thank you for joining us in Oregon, but is now the executive director of Oregon Ag in the Classroom.
That's right. I've been here for almost 14 months.
Nice. So you've been through all the rainy season, dry season, rainy season.
Yeah.
Yes. But this winter, I will say it's been surprisingly pleasant and I really miss the sun. So I'm really trying to take it in.
So this is really good. We had recently a national Ag in the Classroom program with Randy Seagraves a couple months ago.
Correct.
And so this is really good. We have a local connection now. So Jade, does every state have an Oregon Ag in the Classroom program?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I like to explain it to people, I usually say first that there's a national agriculture in the classroom and there's only one Oregon. So Minnesota doesn't have Oregon Ag in the Classroom, but they have Minnesota Ag in the Classroom.
This is so confusing.
I think you can follow along. I think you got this.
So, so each state does have its own agriculture in the classroom program.
Right.
We're all set up a little bit differently, but in Oregon, we operate as a nonprofit.
And what do you do?
As the executive director, I do a lot of things, although in general, I think that I see what I do as our mission, which is to make sure that we're helping students learn more about Oregon agriculture, the environment, and natural resources. But I would say that my job specifically is much more nuanced. So as the director, I'm, usually fundraising and overseeing programs. And also most recently, Michelle, you and I were working on strategic planning.
We love a good plan.
Yeah. I'm really like a checklist to-do list gal. So that's been really exciting to, I think a lot of people think of Oregon Ag in the Classroom and they think of, well, we are what our mission is, but really the staff is the mission. And I just make sure that we all stay on the rails.
So you mentioned programming. What types of programming do you do?
Sure. Gosh. Okay. Well, I'll just start with this morning. So in the spring, and I will also say that, and I think this is probably very similar across many Ag in the Classroom programs, but all of our work is very cyclical. So in the winter and the spring, we're really focusing on the literacy project. And this is an annual project that we do and have done for, I can't remember, I think this is the 18th year, but my second year. So every spring we have the annual spring literacy project. And every year we pick a new book related to agriculture. This year we're featuring the book This year we're featuring the book Outdoor Farm, Indoor Farm by Lindsay Metcalf. And the book is probably no surprise, comparing outdoor farm technologies to indoor farm technologies. We also develop an activity to go with it, and then we go around to different classrooms all together to read the book and to do the activity. It takes about 45 minutes. And we do that every spring. So we've been piloting it this year and really testing it out, making sure that the project and the instructions are cohesive and that it's age appropriate. So last year, in the 2024 school year, we reached almost 20,000 students, which was our biggest year yet. So that was about 912 classrooms. So this year we placed an order for about 900 books. So we hope to do that many again. So then that's just one program, though. We do so many other things. In the spring, we also have a calendar art contest. So we get entries from students all over the state. Last year, we had about 1,500 different calendar entries, and each one has to feature Oregon agriculture. Also, unsurprisingly, we don't accept things like, logos like Tillamook ice cream, for example, but we generally look for entries that feature different Oregon commodities.
So dairy, strawberries. Yeah. And you've probably mentioned this on the podcast before, but Oregon has over 220 different commodities. Amazing.
So, you can imagine how many different pieces of artwork we would have to get.
I have a copy of that calendar upstairs in my office. But not only that, I always make sure I get a couple cases, and everyone always looks forward to every year around our office. I hand them out to all my coworkers, and I get those. They're wonderful.
Everyone loves them. They're so
Yeah.
good. And so that's kind of a staple. And then what are some other staple programmings you have?
Yeah. So those I would say are probably our two biggest programs. And again, like I said, we do those every spring. But, Michelle, as you alluded to, we don't just do that. We like to focus on providing educators with resources because direct to student programming is great, but the bigger impact is really when we can get into classrooms and through teachers, and then they can make, their impact and reach on students. So we offer educator workshops. We do usually content specific ones. We also do, we develop different lesson plans and kits. So effectively the lesson plan with all of the materials that you need would be a kit. And teachers can request that through our lending library program. So a lot of educator resources, all for free. And then we also do a couple of other direct-to-student programs. So we have our virtual field trips, which have been also wildly popular. Next to the Literacy Project, the virtual field trips are our second most popular used resources. So last year we had over 14,000 students tune in. And as you can imagine, it's virtual. So we're inviting students to attend these field trips, and they get to explore Oregon farms that are either in their backyard or across the state, but from the comfort of the classroom. And especially, as we all probably know, just funding differences in schools, it makes it a really accessible opportunity for all students and teachers to just be able to learn more about Oregon agriculture.
I'm writing all this stuff down because I'll include links to all this stuff in our show notes and stuff. Now, I did want to mention, like you said, you provide it for free, but it's free for probably Oregonians. And so other states might have to check out their local site, right, to get similar resources.
Yeah, and that's a good question, too, really bringing it back to the beginning. So all of our resources that we provide, both for educators and students, and I will actually also clarify and say almost all of our resources for educators are free to request, unless, of course, you're from Washington, for example. And bringing it back to, Rick, your first question, because each state has their own agriculture in the classroom program, then we would just refer them to their appropriate state. So Washington educators, we would refer you to Washington agriculture in the classroom.
As well as other states.
Correct. Yeah. So
Not just Washington.
Yeah. So Kansas, for example, would reach out to Kansas agriculture.
I got it.
We love Kansas.
Yeah.
So Jade, how did you get involved in this? What made you think ag in how did you end up in the field you're at today? Where did you start out from?
Yeah, sure. I love telling this story because it involves the shortened version of my life story.
Nice.
So I grew up in Minnesota, and I knew from a really young age that I wanted to do something with food. I wouldn't say that I knew that I wanted to do something with agriculture at that point, but I loved being outside. I loved nutrition. And then once I got to college, I quickly realized I probably can't survive off chocolate cake. So I should maybe be a little bit better of a cook. But I was already a pretty good baker. So, cooking really wasn't that challenging for me. And I found out that I really loved it. And so I started to explore through volunteer opportunities. And I was also a server, like a waitress at a restaurant. I started to explore, what would it look like if students could garden, but then also bring that into nutrition? So kind of that garden nutrition education pathway. And I would really have to credit some of my professors in college for just opening that interest, because I always go back to that, and I'm just so thankful for that. So when I was in school, I went to TCU in Fort Worth, and I was a nutrition major.
Go Frogs.
Yeah, go Frogs. That's right.
And TCU stands for?
Yeah, Texas Christian University. Yeah. Proud alumni. So now I'm getting off topic. But when I graduated, I knew, I feel like as any young person does, you want to do something really important and you want to try and save the world. But as my mom liked to say, you can't really save everyone. But I was like, well, I can just do my to-do list, right? I can save my version of the world. And I, out of the blue, heard about this opportunity to work for an organization called Project Horseshoe Farm, which is a small nonprofit in rural Alabama. So if you've heard of Greensboro, Alabama, it's about an hour south of Tuscaloosa, where the University of Alabama is. And it really is in the middle of nowhere. And my parents thought at the time, when I was about to graduate, thought I was going to move home to Iowa to go to a grad program back in Iowa. Well, I was going to move back closer to home to go to grad school in Iowa. So I would only be 4 hours from home, which is Minnesota. Anyway, important point of clarification.
No problem.
And so I got this job offer, and I basically said, oh, actually, I'm going to move further away. And my mom was kind of like, well, I feel like you've always had these opportunities that you like have worked really hard for and saw it, and you should pursue that. So I moved to rural Alabama. I worked at Project Horseshoe Farm, like I said, a small nonprofit, but my role specifically was Farming Health and Nutrition Fellow. And it was a new role at the time, and the role itself, parts of the duties, but the role itself didn't survive COVID because I graduated in 2019 and the program went through 2020. But that was a really exciting opportunity for me because I got to work on a farm full time, but also help develop community nutrition programming. And I got to do a lot of different things, but probably my most fun and important takeaway was the kids cooking class that I helped develop. And so we taught them about a different, produce item that we either had left over at the farm or just that we were trying to show them growing in the garden. And, one of my biggest moments of pride was when every week we featured a new vegetable for them to try. And these kids, they didn't try a lot of vegetables. And they said, well, Miss Jade, we're not really sure what we want to try next week, but everything you've cooked for us so far has been so good. So we trust you, you can pick it. And so that was really just, makes your heart warm. And kind of from there, I thought, well, I have this experience in nutrition, registered dietitian. I have this experience in agriculture, and I really liked this element of nonprofits that I was working in. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to shift my dream a little bit, because at the time I was 21 and, I felt so lucky. Like this was exactly what I wanted to do. And I don't know how many 21-year-olds get their dream job straight out of college. So I was like, okay, well, I did that, check done. What's next? And so I thought, well, I really want to be the executive director of a nonprofit that teaches kids about food, agriculture, and nutrition. So I moved to Georgia, and I just kind of felt like I was missing the agriculture education background. I didn't really have that, but I had, like I said, garden education, nutrition education, agriculture hands-on experience. So I went into a master's program at UGA, University of Georgia in Athens, and my research advisor, Dr. Peak, was so wonderful, and he was actually already working on some funding for a similar program that really aligned with my dreams. And so, about halfway through my master's, he said, I got that funding. Would you ever consider pursuing your doctorate? And I was like, oh, I don't know, but sure. So
your doctorate in
agriculture education.
Okay.
Yep. So my master's program was in agriculture education. And this was just basically to continue in the same department, working on what I was already working on. So I, fast tracked my master's, finished that. And then I moved directly into my PhD program to research farm to school programs in Georgia. And,
what a great area for that. We have a lot of friends down there. We've just interviewed down for Georgia Organics.
Aaron Kroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know Aaron.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
episode number 172. Just kidding. We don't number them.
We don't know numbers.
We have no idea.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Side note. I did. Anyway, I heard that episode, but, yeah. So a lot happened while I was in grad school. I was there for about 3.5 years. I was also a really dedicated student. So I did my master's and PhD in 3.5 years, which is really quick.
Wow.
I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Sorry. It took me 9.5. So that's why I'm in shock. Okay. Keep going. This is interesting.
Yeah. And I learned a lot. And I really loved, just like as a side note, my dissertation focused on narrative inquiry, because I love, people's stories are important and their voices need to be heard. And so I think I really fell into that because I've always loved being a learner. And I think it's more important that you really acknowledge what you've taken from other people and reflect on that. And so that really, I think, shown in my dissertation. But regardless, I studied farm to school in Georgia, more specifically, what is it? How did it come to be? Telling the story of that. It wasn't really recorded anywhere. And as someone who loves why, I was really fascinated by what is the answer? Why did this come to be? And then about the time that I was getting ready to kind of finish and wrap up and start thinking about my final year, this position in Oregon opened up rather. And, I brought it to my professor and I said, this position opened up. It's what I want to do. It's Oregon agriculture in the classroom, teaching kids about agriculture, not food and nutrition, but it can be aligned, but agriculture, natural resources, and the environment. And he said, well, of course you have to apply. And I also talked to my fiance at the time, now husband. He was like, I'm not going to tell you to, turn down your dream job. And I don't think either of us thought I was going to get it because I had been a professional student for my entire life. And, he tells me now, obviously he's proud of me, but he says, no one gets the first job that they interview for straight out of college. And then I got the job.
Jade does. Jade does.
So then we moved to Oregon, and that's how I came to be doing what I have been, wanting to do since I was almost 12.
Nice. Great story. That's awesome. And then, Michelle, you have so many connections with that's how you started out there. Your dissertation was essentially on farm to school too, right? Before there was a term. And now you've seen somebody else kind of do it kind of full circle.
Well, that's what I was so excited about when I first met Jade. I was like, wait a second, this like worked. Like we have a strategic plan because we love planning, but around professionalizing the field and increasing people in the pipeline. And so when I was in grad school, okay, we're going to 1999, but
wow, back in the other century.
I know, thanks a lot. It's true actually. But I was told, by my advisors, like, no, you can't do school gardening. Like school gardening wasn't a legitimate field of study. There's no theoretical framework. There's no like roadmap for studying it. And so, fast forward, we ended up doing a lot of that theory development work, but I was just curious of like, you were actually encouraged to do research in farm to school. I wanted to hear like more about that. Like that is a huge change in a very short amount of time.
Yeah. So a couple of things. In agriculture education, there's not a lot of qualitative research being done. And I've had 2 qualitative articles published in the Journal of Ag Ed. So, to me, that kind of speaks similar to what you're saying, Michelle, is that there's more acceptance in research now for just like how knowledge is produced and created and synthesized. But also, the other side of that is I had a really, really supportive research advisor, and I simply don't think I could have done it without that support. And he was really big on, students come into this department with their questions that they want answered. And you're never going to, going back to a point I made earlier, you're never going to save the world or solve all the problems with the dissertation because that's not what it's supposed to be. It's simply like one question. And my question was, what is farm to school in Georgia? And it's much more than that, but that was essentially what I was answering. But I was just really encouraged to pursue that. And I happened to come in at just like a really, serendipitous time where he was also looking at farm to school as a tangent really quick. He was researching, how to get elementary ag ed kickstarted in Georgia. And his kind of, preliminary beliefs prior to research were maybe farm to school is this model. And so then, he stumbles upon me and says, well, here's this girl who believes the same thing as me. And, I guess I'm pretty smart. So he said, well, use that brain and like, let's work together basically. So yeah, I guess that was a really roundabout way of answering your question, but basically I just feel like I had a really supportive advisor who was working on a similar problem. And he said, go for it. Like, let's see what we can find.
Yep, mentors and others really matter in all fields, and particularly ours. And so research is like one component of the entire farm to school ecosystem. So from your perspective, Jade, how does research fit into informing and forwarding the movement?
Yeah, that's a great question. That was a question that my committee also really encouraged me to think about.
Oh, good. I could have been on your committee.
Yeah, you really.
Yeah.
Actually, you could have. You really could have. Why is it important?
How does research inform or forward the farm to school movement?
Yeah. So I guess like simply, my committee always encouraged me to think about the fact that, and this is kind of something I hold an opinion on too, but what we do in research exists in this imaginary bubble. It's really important, but it is so outside of what the mundane individual is doing. And not to simplify what we're all doing as individuals, but research just exists in a place that is pretty much in our minds. And so they always just encouraged me really to think about, okay, you've done all this work, you're trying to tell the story of what farm to school is, particularly in Georgia. But what does that mean for the educators that you're trying to reach? Because I guess I should go back and clarify too that specifically I was looking at trying to basically antagonize capital farm to school in the formal sense versus lowercase farm to school in the general practices that anyone might be doing, but is not necessarily doing it because it's a formalized program. And I was just basically trying to say, if there is a tension between these two ideologies, what does that mean for farm to school? And again, specifically in Georgia, because that's where I was located. But really at the end of the day, I had to think about what the end result of that argument would mean for educators. Because I was only looking at that one bubble of farm to school. Farm to school is, is education and it's classrooms and it's the farmers, but I was specifically just focusing on the education component. So I think all that to say that research helps advance, it puts out new ways to think about same problems. It puts out, new knowledge to reconsider existing phenomenon that people are interacting with.
And what conclusions did you draw from your narrative approach?
Man, this is where I might have to sit back for a second.
And we don't need to even go. You know what? Let's not even go in that direction.
Let's not. Okay.
Well, I can answer that really quick.
Okay, because we can do it differently. And maybe you could ask it later. Because, it's interesting. Okay, so she said what her committee said, and they were saying,
am I answering your question, by the way?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
I'm just trying. This is something we've never talked about, which is why I wanted to kind of linger on it for a second, because we don't really ever do research, the role of research. I just think it's really interesting saying research exists in a bubble.
Is that yours? Is that your?
No, it looks like things that. Yeah, he's laughing because I've pretty much produced something very similar. It's interesting they say research exists in a bubble. That's definitely one way. And in Oregon, we've really pushed ourselves. We've heard of like youth-led research, but Oregon's so unique that we have been doing like community-led research, and like the evaluation and research projects we do are largely designed to inform policy.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's the thing.
Yeah. And so focused on, nonprofits, our community partners are testing lots of different things in different areas, and they need help with evaluation of those, but then also, research to the legislature to come up with policy concepts, and then we test those, and then we do things for marketing companies. So we're a little intentional about the role of evaluation and research in forwarding the movement within Oregon.
Yeah.
And it's really messy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I want to add to, I feel like what you're describing is more action-aligned research and project-based, whereas I feel like in my dissertation, I focused really on qualitative, which is not to say that qualitative social sciences can't help put practical solutions out there. But the only reason I felt like I said that I felt like I was antagonizing capital farm to school versus lowercase farm to school, that was just kind of a made up argument in my head for the sake of arguments purposes. That wasn't necessarily something that anyone else put out there.
It sounds really smart.
I have 2 PhDs online with me here who are saying these $2 words like qualitative, and my head's just spinning here. Can you guys dumb it down for me a little bit?
Well,
what is capital farm to school?
Yeah. So I just want to say too, like, yes, research absolutely has a time and a place and a space to be practical and solutions based, because, if you look at just even marketing and what's on our shelves, that's research. And I don't want to be like, oh, in my research, because I really don't think I'm a conceited person, so I'm not trying to make it about me.
But if you haven't been in a PhD program, you learn how to say in my work.
But
just do it.
But like,
it's only us talking here.
Right.
No one's listening.
I sat in a lot of, qualitative classes, and of course we all felt like, our work and our research is the most important thing in the world. And so I just feel like in that process in grad school and research, you spend so much time in your head coming up with these problems. And I'm not going to say that education problems are unimportant. But in comparison to saving a life, for example, it's very different research. And so in that way is what I mean, that sometimes I felt like I spent a lot of grad school and a lot of my research just like stuck up in this imaginary, stuck up literally as in like a verb, not like I am stuck up, but like I just felt like I spent a lot of time
Thank you for
stuck
clarifying.
up in this, proverbial bubble of what am I even trying to do? But what you initially asked, how does research help inform just the public? Like that's the answer, right? Like what am I trying to do? Well, I'm trying to help make farm to school feel more approachable for educators, more doable, more tangible.
Is there anything from the narrative inquiry to leave us with that we would want to think about?
Sure. So something I wrote down before this meeting that I think is important is in narrative inquiry, there's a lot of ways. There's a lot of ways to tell a story. And I won't pretend to remember everything from my research because it's been a couple of years. But something that I did kind of underline and highlight, at least just a point that I wanted to make, is the specific approach of narrative inquiry that I took was looking at the told. So in narrative inquiry, there's a couple of different theories, but one of them is that you can either say what was told to you, so representing what the participants are telling you, or you can do a retelling. And I specifically chose to utilize my participants' words pretty much verbatim because I thought it was important to emphasize what was told to me and not pretend like it was my story to retell. And so in both articles 1 and 2 of my dissertation, I focused on really telling the told. I used exactly what the participants said, but I, blended the different interviews together so that it felt like you were on a podcast show, for example, like people were chiming in and saying, oh, this is who I am. And this is what I believe, etc. So, I think that would be my takeaway is that in the narrative inquiry approach that I used, I wanted to emphasize what was told to me because that's kind of one of my, I guess, like internal missions is that you should really hear what people are telling you and not try to reframe it or reshape it into your purpose. So.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'm going to think about that for quite some time. That was, thank you.
There's a lot to ponder and chew on there.
And we'd like to thank all of you so much for listening today. Farm to School is written, directed, and produced by Rick Sherman and Michelle Markiston with help from Leanne Locker of Oregon State University and was made possible by a grant from the United States Department of Agriculture.
The content and ideas on the Farm to School podcast does not necessarily reflect the opinions of Oregon State University, Oregon Department of Education, the United States Department of Agriculture, or Oregon Ag in the Classroom. The USDA, Oregon Department of Education, and Oregon State University are equal opportunity providers and employers.
Do you want to learn more about Farm to School? Of course you do. So check out our other episodes, our show notes, and there's even contact information for us. Literally, if you click on contact, we will look at it and get back to you.
Yep. Thank you so much for stopping by, and stop by that website Michelle just mentioned to say hello, and please give us an idea for a future podcast. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, and you'll get all Jade's links to her articles and Ag in the Classroom and everything else. And Jade, thank you for coming to talk to us.
Thanks, Jade.
Hey, thank you for having me.